Number 4.
I live in Wyoming and work night shifts at one of the local Walgreens. Being a sort of late night pharmacy, we get some weird and unpleasant people frequently enough to brush it off for the most part. On this day, I went to clock in for my shift and noticed 2 Native American men sitting at one of the photo kiosks using the Western Union. I thought it was off how they seemed to be more lounging around, but left it alone. After clocking in, I overheard them explaining to a manager that they'll have to try again later because the money they were waiting for hadn't transferred yet. So they came back later. I was working register that night and was in photo. Since it was still pretty early in the evening, there were still quite a few employees finishing up some work. What was off was when one of the guys came back in. He had left less than a couple of minutes ago. It wasn't so weird to have people forget stuff, so I said hi and left it alone. But then I saw him sitting at the photo kiosk again, and he started talking to Candy. He left after a while again, and Candy came over to tell me what he said. He had been complimenting her body and got pretty descriptive. Creepy. I told her to tell the manager because that's kind of harassment. She did, but little came of it. She could be dramatic on occasion, but she wouldn't make something like this up. Barely a few minutes pass, and that guy comes back again. He talks to Candy, and after he leaves, she comes back over to me. He had given her more comments and told her that he'd love to see what she looked like intoxicated. Now, I'm 22 and she's only 18. I've worked here over a year now, and I'm as protective of her as I am of my little sisters. I was livid. I told her to tell the management, and then I told several managers myself that those 2 creeps need to be banned. Our main store manager was reluctant to call the cops though. That was until we heard that they were outside panhandling. That was bad enough, but what set me off was that they were only approaching young girls. Candy was scared and asked one of the managers to go outside with her so she could move her car closer to the door. And guess who was outside, lingering over the side of the lot where her car was. I was grateful that they had no clue which car was hers. She came in, and since I knew she had to get gas after work, I told her I'd go with her in my own car after work to make sure she was okay. After a while, it was just us and our closing manager. We'll call him Josh. Thankfully, Josh took all this seriously. He was talking to Candy about the situation, and at that moment, the other guy came in, making a beeline to the photo counter. Candy went behind the counter to hide herself, and I made a signal to Josh as I handed a customer her money back. Typically, we paid your code, but since Josh was right there, I tried to look as normal as possible. He got the hint, and immediately he strode up to the guy and told him he needed to leave, and next time they don't get a warning. We'll just call the cops. The guy almost bolted out, and I couldn't help but smile. That night, Candy's boyfriend took her home, and the next day, I took her to work. The guys claimed that they were from Arizona and would be in town for a few days, so until they left, I was still on guard and made sure she always had someone around. Guys like this give all us with native blood a bad name. I'm so happy my friend is safe and that Josh stepped in.
Number 3.
This happened about 5 years ago when I was a senior in high school. This particular day, I was sitting in German and had to go to the bathroom. I asked Frau, and sure enough, she let me go. I decided to take my water bottle with me and fill it up at the water fountain, which was right outside the bathrooms. I filled my water bottle and then set it on top of the fountain as I went to the bathroom. I'd been doing this for years, so I didn't see anything wrong with it. But now I know not to leave my drink unattended. Now I know. I came out of the bathroom, grabbed my water bottle, and headed back to class. The rest of German went by without a hitch, with me downing half of the bottle. And after class, I headed to film, which is when things got weird. To get to film from German, I had to go down a set of stairs and then down 2 hallways. Halfway down the stairs, everything just seemed sort of blurred. Images melded in together, and balancing on the steps was becoming difficult. Naturally, I started to panic. I didn't know what was going on, or why everything was getting so weird, but my panic subsided when my vision cleared and my balance stabilized. It lasted for about 3 minutes while I walked down the first hall, but it came back tenfold on the way down the second set. Although this time it was different, much stronger. Everything got blurry again, and instead of balance problems, I could hardly walk. My feet seemed to weigh about 10 pounds each, and even breathing was hard. My head felt like a cinder block, and I couldn't concentrate on anything. I couldn't even panic anymore. I started falling in the hall, and I grabbed onto the wall and just sort of sank down. One of the boys from my film class saw me, however, and came over. He asked me what was going on, which was extremely pointless given I couldn't talk, but I think he realized that something was seriously wrong. He helped me up and carried me to the nurses when it became clear that walking was a manageable but difficult task. I'll never be able to thank him enough for helping me. He saved me from who knows what that day. The nurse called the ER immediately and they performed a few blood tests. I had been drugged, roofied they said, during school. My dad, a really tough Southern European guy with a soft spot for his daughters, was insanely pissed. He demanded that the school look at the security cameras from that day. I reviewed them with him the next day and was initially confused by what I saw. The only time I had filled up my water bottle in school that day had been during German. The security cameras showed it as untouched. No one was even in the hall while I was in the bathroom. This really freaked me out because if I wasn't drugged sometime between my trip to the bathroom and the passing period between German and film, I had to have been drugged inside of my German class. There were no cameras in the classrooms to prove it, but there was nowhere else that it could have happened. I thought back on it, and the only time I left my desk unattended in that class was when I got up to ask Frau a question. That took about 5 minutes, and in that time, someone took my water bottle, drugged it, and then set it back without me noticing. The thing is, my German class was huge, so someone must have seen it happening, and they didn't do anything if they did. They would have just let who knows what happen to me. I don't know what the person who drugged me wanted, and I don't ever want to know. I'm way less trusting of people now, and believe me, I never leave my drink unattended, and neither should you, please. You don't know what sick fucks are out there and what they might do to you.
Number 2.
This story, it's a bit different. In this story, I was the thief. I was going to steal something, but someone terrifying stopped me from doing it. It all started a few years ago. It was my birthday and I was 16. All of my friends were older than me and they already had cars. I was always driving on the back seat when we were going somewhere. But now I was finally able to change this. The problem is, I didn't have the amount of money for a car. There were no jobs for 16-year-old kids, so I decided to steal the money. The house I was going to steal from was the house next to ours. In it lived a man, a woman, and a little girl around the age of 5. I was lucky because it turned out the mother and father were leaving for a week and called a babysitter. I spent weeks in my room working on the plans on how to do it. When the day finally came, I made sure that it was late enough so that no one would see me. Now that it was 11 PM, it was a perfect time to go in. Their door was pretty easy to unlock. I was in there in no time. The house was all quiet and dark. They had a lot of jewelry. I opened the bag on my back and started stealing things that looked expensive. The house was on 2 floors and bedrooms were on the second one. I know because I've been there many times. So I figured the big cash should be in the parents' room. The only problem was I had to pass the child's and guest's room without waking anyone up. While walking up the stairs, I heard singing from the girl's room. I figured that she must have been playing with her dolls and will be asleep very soon. I passed the rooms and got to the parents' one. Lucky me, I found a hidden drawer. I opened it and inside of it, jackpot. Jewelry, money, so much stuff. I stole all that I could very slowly and quietly. The last thing I wanted to do is wake the babysitter. When passing through the hall, I could still hear the singing though. It was the exact same melody and exact same lyrics. I just want to point out, it was now midnight. I wanted to leave, but curiosity took over me. I slowly opened the door. The little girl was sitting on the carpet, looking straight at me. My eyes locked with hers. It was like I was trying to look away, but I couldn't. Then she stopped singing, and the words she said to me I'll remember forever.
"Hello, friend. Are you here to play with me?"
It was so quiet, and it had no emotion at all. After she did that, she grinned with a huge smile, so huge it was terrifying. I sprinted out of there, leaving the backpack behind. No one learned about this day, but I'm still afraid to go into their house. Who was that girl?
Number 1.
Okay, so let me start off by saying that this isn't my story, it's my mum's. I recently took sociology as an option at school, and we were discussing serial killers and whether they were born that way or was it to do with environmental factors. One thing led to another, and the class discussion turned towards the famed Moores murders, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. They operated in the greater Manchester area where my family have lived throughout many generations, and they committed their crimes in the 60s. They mostly killed children and teenagers and dumped their bodies in the Saddleworth Moor, hence the nickname. Myra Hindley is often dubbed the most evil woman in history. I'm a bit of an unusual type of person. Yes, all of this stuff I learned was horrible, but it strangely interested me. I guess it's the same reason people slow down to look at a car crash or watch horror movies. So anyway, I came home from school and got the usual, "So how was your day?" I told my mum my lessons, and then we had dinner, etc. And eventually, I got on to mention the infamous couple. At first, my mum was silent for a bit, and then she finally replied,
"I used to know Myra Hindley."
I was shocked at first. I couldn't quite believe it. So I passed it off as a joke and laughed. She then turned to me.
"No, seriously. I knew Myra Hindley,"
she said bluntly. Her tone of voice and serious nature about these sort of things eventually made me realize my mother was telling the truth. As anyone would have, I asked how. My mum was born in Longside in Manchester in the 50s, but spent most of her childhood in the 60s. Kids had a lot more freedom in them days, and my mum told me how it wasn't out of the question if she wanted to walk to the park by herself at the age of 7. It was obviously a different time, but of course, this freedom came with dangers and at a heavy cost for some. My mum would often visit her cousin's house to play. They'd play with their dolls, dress up and comb each other's hair, the usual little girl antics. Most of the time, they stayed at her cousin's house, where her mother usually resided to keep an eye on them, but on special occasions, my mum's aunt and uncle would go out together. They made sure though that my mum's niece had a babysitter, however, and you guessed it, Myra Hindley. She was a friend of my mum's uncle's sister. Bit of a mouthful, I know, but she was a young woman, just barely in her 20s. My mum recalls her always being distant, hardly ever speaking, and just giving the occasional look like she was impatient. She wasn't a hands-on babysitter to say the least. She would just sit idly in the lounge, either watching TV or just quietly waiting for her shift to be over. She didn't babysit my mum and her cousin for long though, just under a year in fact. She was kindly asked to stop after she kept inviting him around, her boyfriend, Ian Brady. During this time, my mum stopped visiting her cousin as even at a young age, she felt uncomfortable around him. Just something about him seemed odd, even to her 8-year-old self. Even my grandmother knew about Brady's past criminal record. Rumour had spread fast, and my mum's aunt and uncle kindly asked Myra to stop inviting him. She refused and was eventually let go. Soon, my mum started visiting again, as her aunt's eldest son was now deemed old enough to take care of them both. Everything was back to normal for a while, and my mum was satisfied. She no longer felt intimidated or scared to visit the house. About 2 or 3 years had passed from this whole ordeal, and one day, my mum and her cousin decided to go to the park. It was about 1.5 miles away, so they packed some change for the corner shop and set off. They played on the roundabout, on the slide and the swings for a few hours, and then when they felt it was time to go, they bought some ice creams for the journey home. It was around the evening at this point. My mum had just finished her ice cream when she noticed a vehicle pull up. It was a classic mini pickup, and who was driving it? You guessed it, Myra. She turned to face my mum and her cousin and stared them down for a good solid few seconds. My mum says she felt extremely confused, as you'd imagine. After babysitting, my mum occasionally saw Myra out and about, but never spoke to her. In fact, she had spoken so little to her in the first place, she barely remembers her voice now. This was the first time the two met eye to eye again. After the staring down, she just drove off without ever saying a word. My mum, to this day, counts herself lucky. On the same night, 12-year-old Keith Bennett was abducted and killed by the two in the very same fashion. Myra pulled up with the car and invited the boy in and then took him to the moors. Little did my mum know that Brady was in the back seat. Was it because my mum was there with her cousin and therefore not alone? Was it because she knew her already? Or was it something else entirely? My mum will never know. When the two were arrested a year or so later, my mum was too young to comprehend, but later in life, she says she often thinks about it, of what could have been. Myra Henley died of a chest infection in 2002. Brady is still alive, and now the longest serving prisoner in England and Wales. If you want to learn more about the murders, a quick Google search will tell you what you need to know. Knowing what could have been, I find a lot of the information distressing now, as does my mum. I thought I'd share this because I think it's a perfect example of how fragile life is and how a single decision can alter history. If whatever was in Myra's mind on that day that made her click didn't happen, then I would not be here today. G'day mates, it's Busta here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their stories for us all to hear. And for the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. And be sure to keep them coming guys, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. Also guys, please do me a little favour and just state in your email what your story is about in the description, and also provide me with a short written statement of consent just so that I can be above board with everything. And also remember to tell me in the email if you would like to remain anonymous, and please also change any names if you don't want particular names to be shared. It would be awesome if you could like, share, comment and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram for updates throughout the week. Thanks again for tuning in guys, and as always, I'll see you mates in the next one.